I don't know, 20, I've been a professor for about 25 years and have been very interested in nanomaterials for quite a long time. So you can see some of my appointments on this slide, as well as some of the companies that have spun out of my lab, also shown in logo form on this slide. So this presentation, I'll be representing some of those companies. So I do need to give some disclosures that I have a financial interest in some of the data that will be presented here today. So I think a great place for us to start when thinking about nanotechnology, nanomaterials, is what is it we're trying to address? And throughout my career in biomaterials, medical devices, I've really been trying to improve our healthcare system. I think like most of us have been. And I have to say, I've been a little bit disappointed in how our healthcare system has been performing lately. I compiled a list. I encourage everybody to do this. I asked students in my lab to do this, people in my companies to do this. What is wrong with our healthcare system that needs to be fixing? And again, I'm sorry to say, it probably takes about 5 minutes for people to assemble a list of 20 or more items of things that are wrong in our healthcare system. And obviously, something that's fresh on our minds is COVID-19. And I think COVID-19 not only should be a wake-up call to all of us of healthcare failures, how traditional healthcare is not working, but I think it also highlighted a number of traditional failures in our healthcare system, things that have been around since before COVID-19. Many of you may have seen that the world life expectancy has decreased this year. Obviously, that's because of COVID and I think some other things, but many people don't know that life expectancy in the United States was going down before COVID-19. So here we have a system, our healthcare system, whose job really is to help promote our health, help keep us healthy, help prevent disease, help diagnose disease, and help treat disease. And if one of the indicators, one of the best indicators of whether something's working or not, our life expectancy is going down, I hope I'm not being too provocative in saying I think our healthcare system is failing. So listed on this slide is not only the example of COVID-19 and how a virus that we knew was coming, viruses are nothing new to our healthcare system, but we were very ill prepared to deal with it. And again, you know, if your only solution to keeping a virus from spreading is to tell people to stay home, you really have to think long and hard how well our healthcare system is doing. But also highlighted on this slide are some other items that people in my lab have suggested as problems in our healthcare system. Overcrowded hospitals. I personally think our whole idea of a concrete building that you have to go to for healthcare is old-fashioned. It's kind of like the horse and buggy way of transporting yourself rather than using modern technology. And I think clearly that idea of having a building where that you have to go in to get healthcare to find out what's wrong with you needs to change. And clearly COVID highlighted that through having patients in hallways and people who couldn't even get into hospitals. And we still see examples of that today. There's also numerous barriers to even getting healthcare. Not only this idea of going into a concrete building or a brick and mortar building to get healthcare, but there's clearly economic barriers to get healthcare. Unfortunately, many studies have highlighted the wealthier you are, the better your healthcare is. I think that's a problem. I also think there's geographical barriers to getting healthcare. And one of the other things that COVID highlighted was psychological barriers, where depending on your sex, your age, your previous disease state, you're more or less likely to go in to see your doctor to get healthcare. And I think if COVID taught us something, and I hope it taught us a lot of things, that considering these barriers, if you are inhibited from getting healthcare, something that affects you can end up affecting everybody in this world. as we saw how quickly SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, spread around the world. We also have medical devices that fail. I would make an argument that every single medical device we use in the body has a failure rate. We don't have 100% successful medical devices. And you could think of hip implants, you could think of cardiovascular stents, deep stimulation neural probes, whatever it is, there are failure rates associated with all of these implants. So that's a problem in our healthcare system. We also have an issue of thinking that pharmaceutical agents will solve all of our problems. If you have an infection, give you an antibiotic. If you have cancer, give you a chemotherapeutic agent. If you need a painkiller before getting surgery and after getting surgery, give you an opioid. Well, in each of those examples, we see the consequences of that approach. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria, chemotherapeutic-resistant cancer cells, and of course, opioid addiction, which has cost too many lives in and around the world. We also tend to treat every patient the same. If I break my hip playing soccer or a sporting event, I will receive generally the same hip implant that my grandmother might receive who falls down the steps. Yet we have completely different patient histories. We have completely different needs for receiving those implants, completely different ages, and we should really have more personalized medicine. And of course, our medicine, I would argue, is largely reactionary. It's not very predictive. So we need to move much more predictive in medicine. I think quite simply, if you look around at other industries, people who build bridges, they don't fix the bridges only when they fail, they prevent them from failing. So clearly preventative medicine has to be much more of an emphasis in our healthcare system. And of course, all of these inefficiencies that are built into our healthcare system have led to increasing costs. We have an increasing global population, so our already stressed healthcare system will be stressed even more in the years to come. And again, I encourage you each to come up with your own problem in the healthcare system. So about 25 years ago, I personally turned to nanotechnology. In my PhD thesis, I believe we were one of the first, if not the first, research group to look at nanoparticles, how they could be formulated into a medical device, and how cells would respond. My particular thesis back in the 1990s was in orthopedics. So can you create a nanomaterial-based implant to improve bone growth? And ever since then, we have been learning so much about nanomaterials, whether they're nanotextured surfaces, self-assembled nanomaterials, nanoparticles. We have learned how well they can improve medicine. And we've learned undoubtedly as a community that you can control cell function through the use of nanomaterials. You can control bacteria function, cancer cell function, bone growth, immune cell, macrophage function, all through the use of these really small particles, which continue to this day to intrigue me. So here's a quick example. I know this is a busy slide, but one of the strategies that we've employed in nanomedicine, nanotechnology, is to take medical devices off the shelf, those that are already approved by regulatory agencies. We know their history, we know their chemistry well, we know their safety profile, but differently, put a nanotexture on that implant. So here are some examples. A 3D printed spinal cage is shown here on the left. Using 3D printing, you can impose a nanotexture. You can change printing rates. You can change the powder size that you started with when doing 3D printing. If it's a laser 3D printer, you can change laser power. All of these things can be used to create a nanotexture. And when we do that, we see the ability, if you create that nanotexture correctly, to improve bone growth, to decrease bacteria colonization, and to decrease chronic inflammation, all without resorting to drugs and only using a very controlled nanotextured feature. We've also been using this process for screws, whether those screws are used for amputees, whether they're used in the spine, as this X-ray shows here. You can create nanotextures on screws through many processes. One of them that we've been very interested in is anodization. Anodization is used on your silverware. It controls that oxide layer that you form on metals. So we can use anodization to create a surface that looks like this highlight that I'm circling here on this slide. That surface can have pores, can have nanotextures, again, that improve bone growth, improve soft tissue growth, close the wound. You can see a rat study right here where we've been able to use nanotextures to have skin grow around metals. Not easy, but those nanotextures can close the wound to keep that implant from getting infected, to keep that implant from suffering from chronic inflammation, something very helpful for those amputees, for people who have lost a limb and receive an artificial limb. We've also done this for increasing orthopedic soft tissue growth. And this one, as with most healthcare situations, is personal to me. I have 3 daughters, and each of them have torn, I'm sorry, 2 of my 3 daughters have torn their ACL. Hopefully the third one does not tear their ACL, but the ACL in your knee, one of the largest, if not the largest, I think, adolescent injury, sporting injury in the United States is ACL tears. So what is done clinically today is you take a screw, you take the remaining orthopedic soft tissue like ligament, or you get a cadaver ligament or find a ligament elsewhere in the patient's body, and you just screw it into bone. So you mechanically put it into bone. That, to me, does not sound efficient. And I think that's why we have such high failure rates for ACL surgeries. What we have been doing is taking these screws that are used for orthopedic soft tissue repair, creating nanotextures, and growing orthopedic soft tissue off of the surface. So we have ligaments attached and growing off of the surface rather than mechanically impeding them. And I could go on. We've been doing the same for vascular stents, for grafts, where we can create nanotextures to increase endothelialization, decrease thrombus formation, et cetera. We can take catheters, put nanotextures on catheters that can decrease infection. So nanotexturing without drugs can control cell function. And in fact, here's some of our human success cases. I need to give credit completely to these companies that are driving these technologies. The initial research was done in my lab, and I've participated in these companies, but really getting FDA approval, having human clinical trials is attributed entirely to these companies. This first X-ray shows pedicle screws. This is a company called NanoV, where again, nanotexturing those pedicle screws. Over 14,000 of these screws have been implanted in humans to date, and no cases of failure, according to the database that's kept on these devices. No cases of infection, no cases of bone non-unions, no cases of chronic inflammation. And these have been implanted for about, I believe, 5 years now. So simply putting nanotextures on spinal screws can improve their performance. And to give you an idea, although the literature's all over the place in this aspect, the typical failure rate that I believe for these spinal devices is around 5%. And that can be from infection, can be from bone non-unions or loosening that occurs from chronic inflammation. So again, something as simple as creating a nanotexture can really improve these devices. Another example is we worked with a company called Syntex, who has silicon nitride. We've created nanotextures on those devices. Over 4,000 have been implanted with no cases of failure either. And we've been working with a company called Tiber, where they have nanotextured foot screws, where over 15,000 have been implanted. And again, no cases of failure. So incredibly promising, super exciting to know the role that nanotexturing can play, not just in vitro and in small order animal studies, but here we're now getting great data on human clinical trials. So we could spend a great deal of time talking about why. Why do cells prefer nanotextures, whereas bacteria don't, or macrophages don't? And I don't have too much time to go into this, but I could give you reasons, very simple reasons, not scientific, of where nanotextures exist in nature. So shown up here is an insect, where you can look at the wing under scanning electron microscopy, and these wings on insects have nanotextures. And what's wonderful is you cannot grow bacteria on these wings. So these wings are antibacterial because of their surface topography. So nature has figured this out. Evolution has figured this out. We're simply borrowing that idea of nanotexturing, putting it on medical devices to reduce these chances of infection or implant failure. I could also talk about biophysical reasons. Wonderful studies have been done by myself and colleagues in which we look at bacteria membrane stiffness. And we find that the bacteria membrane is too stiff to attach to all of these contours, nano contours that you put on an implant surface. So in contrast, a mammalian cell, which is much bigger than a bacteria, its membrane is much more flexible, can attach to those nanotextures. And in fact, the nanotexture for a mammalian cell provides more surface area, more three-dimensional aspect, which improves a mammalian cell, like a bone cell's ability to create bone. Another area we've been very interested in is surface energy. One of the reasons we get so excited about nanomaterials, you shrink the size of a surface feature or a particle, you increase surface area, you can change surface energy. You can make a surface more hydrophobic or more hydrophilic, depending on your need. The reason that's important is, as you can see down here, cells don't attach directly to an implant, they attach to proteins that have adsorbed to an implant. Well, all these proteins in our body have different charges. Some of them are more hydrophilic, some of them are more hydrophobic. Certain regions are more hydrophilic and hydrophobic. So what we have learned is these nanotextures, if you create them correctly, you can repel proteins that bacteria like, or macrophages like, immune cells like, or you can attract proteins that bone cells like to create bone. And here's an example of that. These are AFM pictures where fibronectin was allowed to adsorb to these surfaces. Fibronectin is, again, a protein that bone cells like. And we've seen some indications that fibronectin reduces bacteria attachment. So you want this protein to adsorb to your surface. We created nanotextures on a polymer called PLGA. Here you can see fibronectin bridging some of these nano bumps that we created. That bridging or fibrillar form of fibronectin is more bioactive. So you can get more of that protein to adsorb and make it more bioactive simply using a nanotexture. If you look at a micron textured polymer like PLGA, that fibronectin you can also see, but it's adsorbed in a spherical globular format, a non-bioactive form. In fact, we created an equation for this whole surface energy relationship to nanotexturing. And if you give us an implant, we can basically tell you what size nanofeature to put on that implant to change its surface energy to make it more useful in medical devices. So here's other applications of this technology where I'll show a video. This is a titanium that was 3D printed to be hydrophobic. You can see the water drops that we're putting on this 3D printed material, balling up. Certainly, we've created that surface to be hydrophobic. Same chemistry, different size of nanofeature, and we can go over here to the hydrophilic version, and we see the water drops completely spreading. So again, this highlights the power of nanotexturing, not changing chemistry. You don't have to redesign your implant chemistry, but change texture. And that in turn can allow you to cover the spectrum of surface energy that can be useful in implants to absorb the proteins you want and then get the cells to attach that you want. But of course, you can use this in many different applications that are highlighted on this slide. All of these, we are using nanotexturing to improve. And in fact, we've coined a term called nano-optimized. We trademarked this term where, again, if you give us an implant or in our own internal work, we figure out what is the best nanotexture to have to give you that energy, to enhance the give you a stamp called nano-optimized. So as much as I love that research, and I've spent, my whole career nanotexturing medical devices and trying to get them in humans to improve performance, I don't think this is our future. I hope this isn't our future, because we need to be much more revolutionary. If you remember that list of healthcare problems, the nanotexturing would accomplish increasing medical device lifetime, but it doesn't do anything about developing materials that are more proactive, more medicine that is more proactive and predictive and less reactive. So we have to think beyond this I'd say, simple idea of nanotexturing into real revolutionary ideas. So I wanted to share with you during this presentation also a couple of future directions that I see that can really revolutionize medical devices and healthcare. And this one we call 4D printing. So 4D printing is an extension of 3D printing. We all are very well aware of how popular 3D printing has become in society. In fact, housing developments in Texas are being 3D printed. Everything is being 3D printed. Well, 4D printing means you change the shape of a material with time. And you can do this in a controllable way, wirelessly, and in real time, and external. So you inject or insert a 3D printed material into the body, into a patient, and you can use an external mechanism to change its shape, to give you a more advantageous implant. So here's a paper that we published. You can, if you're interested, go to the YouTube site and see a more lengthy video on how this works. But one of those external stimulants is near infrared. Near infrared is also growing in popularity in medicine. So near infrared is a certain wavelength, of course. It can penetrate tissues, penetrate skin. So if we had a 3D printed flower, for example, and we incorporated nanoparticles that respond to near infrared. So as an example, you could use graphene nanoparticles. When they're exposed to near infrared wavelengths, they heat up. And when they heat up, they change the shape of the polymer. So you can think of a flower that you can open on demand. You can think of a hand that's been 3D printed. And when you add those graphene nanoparticles or any nanoparticle that responds to near infrared, you can insert different fingers on demand and controllably. Same with sensors or circuits where you can close or open certain pathways of circuits to allow certain chemical reactions to occur. And of course, if you wanted to flatten someone's heart, you could have a 3D printed heart, apply near infrared, and you could shrink or expand its shape. So we've been using this in many different applications. One particular application that I'll show here in this video is stem cells. One of the problems that we've realized over the decades with using stem cells is when you culture them on petri dishes, you need chemicals to lift them, put them in a syringe, and then inject them into a damaged part of the body. Unfortunately, particularly for the brain, some new and up-and-coming stem cells that people are interested in are very finicky. And when you use enzymes to release them off of a petri dish, you kill a lot of those stem cells. So here in this video, we're showing that you can go from a flat material, 4D printed material that's based on a petri dish example. You culture stem cells on top, and then you can control its shape into a tube or some other shape that can be easily delivered into the body. In other words, you don't need to lift the cells. You use the same material that's used for that petri dish as the stem cell delivery device, using this 4D printed shape control material. And our studies are showing through that shape change, you don't change things like PC12 cells, model neurons, you don't change their function at all. You keep them alive and enable them to be delivered in the body to help with human health. Here's other studies that we've published where, again, in A here, you have a shape, you apply near infrared, you can see that shape change starting to occur. We very closely monitor the temperature change that occurs. Again, that temperature change is enabling that material to change shape. And we've seen through histology, immunohistochemistry, that we're keeping cells alive. So the heat that's generated is enough to change the shape of the material, but it's not high enough to kill the cells. So we've done this for a lot of different applications. I don't have time to go into this too much for orthopedics, but you can inject a certain material that we created. It's a self-assembled material into bone defects, into cartilage defects. Use this 4D printing idea to swell those materials. We know under certain pressures, bone will grow, and under certain pressures, cartilage will grow. So you can swell, make these materials swell remotely, depending on if you need bone growth, more bone growth, or do you need cartilage growth or other types of tissue growth. Use that pressure change to stimulate cell growth. Here's another example of a 4D printed material that you can see the video. Here you don't see the near infrared device. These are like the shape of a pen, but you can see the reflection here, pink, and it's showing that when you apply that near infrared onto that part of the material, you can change its shape. And here we're making it lengthen. So we're not only looking at stem cell and orthopedic applications, but also things like scoliosis, straightening a patient's spine. As you know, if you're a child and you have scoliosis, you have to receive several spinal rods, a lot of surgery, a lot of recuperation. Wouldn't it be nice to have one material that's inserted? You control its lengthening, that in turn controls the spinal straightening so that you only have one surgery. And we're also looking at sphincters, where things like acid reflux or other sphincters in the body, they weaken as we age. So using these 4D printed materials to help strengthen these sphincters to open or close can certainly help in medicine as well. And I wanted to also show you in vivo results, right? As we all know, in the biomaterials and nanomaterials realm, going from in vitro to in vivo is quite complicated. So here's just one of many studies we have where we implanted a curved material. Here you can see before irradiation, just under the skin of rats. We applied near infrared and we're able to straighten that material. So we have a lot of data inserting these materials in different spots of the rat. Using near infrared, we can change its shape to accomplish a function, a certain function of that implant. Lastly, I wanted to leave you with another area. This doesn't really have too much to do with nanotechnology, but I'm just super excited about it. So I'll cover it quickly. Digital health. And really, I think digital health gets to this whole concept of personalized medicine and how we need our medicine to be much more personalized to the patient and less cookie cutter standard kind of approach. So digital health, a lot of people are involved in this. We are too, using cell phones that have adapters connected to them that can gather your health and send that health to the cloud where your clinician can access it. You can access it to get a better idea of what your health is. We're also incorporating artificial intelligence into our digital health approach, where we can predict how you would respond to a certain medical treatment based on prior history. So all of this we're incorporating into digital health. Let me just give you one small example of how we're using temperature as a way to assess patient health after receiving a medical device. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is as you have an infection after receiving a medical device or get an infection for any reason, your local temperature will increase because of that infection. Inflammation also causes an increase in temperature. If you have normal tissue healing, you don't have that increase in temperature. So we've been following patients who have received knee implants. Here's a time scale of doing a temperature profile after 4 days compared to 15 days. You can clearly see the incision and you can see the changes in temperature that we're able to measure with your cell phone. And that change in temperature can give us indications whether that implant's being infected, or in this case, everything's healing fine. And that would indicate to the doctor that it's okay to remove the stitches. There's no further antibiotics that are necessary. So we're not over-prescribing patients with antibiotics and leading to antibiotic resistant. And same with inflammation. We don't see adverse chronic inflammation starting to set in or severe inflammation setting in. So there's no need for that kind of treatment. So we're using these temperature profiles to tell us, and the patient at home, they can do this on their own, how well their wound is healing after receiving an implant. And I'll leave you with this thought that we can also look inside the body, not just at the surface of wounds, but using these applications on your cell phone, these temperature connectors, you can look in depth in the tissue and you can see, is that orthopedic soft tissue, muscles, tendons, are they attaching to the knee implant to even signal greater healing and greater potential success? So we're able to scan the whole entire patient to really assess at a very local level changes in temperature, which can tell us about patient health. So, oh, I'm sorry, one last example, and I'll do this real quick because I know I'm over time. We're also looking at a breathalyzer. So using nanotechnology to create these breathalyzers to tell you what is in your breath. And this was a company called Quarkson that I'm a part of, where we're able to do a molecular imprinting. So if you wanted to determine if you had an infection and you know in your breath you have a certain protein that is produced when you have a systemic infection, we take that protein, we make a molecular imprint onto these sensors. We also use graphene nanoparticles to then measure the change of conduction or resistance when that attachment occurs. So we're learning a lot about what we can analyze in people's breath using this approach. So we're using these sensors for helping with Alzheimer's disease, where we have animal data from an Alzheimer's rat model, in which we use this again to measure differences in resistance to know if certain proteins are produced when we induce Alzheimer's in these rats. We're also looking at addiction like oxycodone or painkiller addiction. Again, you can measure changes in resistance when these molecules from your breath attach to the sensor, change resistance, and we can figure out if you have taken too much oxycodone, have you taken any at all? You know, we do know from the addiction literature that a lot of people will lie about whether they've taken painkillers or not. So these kinds of technologies can really help the medical community. And we have some real patient data at Massachusetts General Hospital that supports these ideas. So I hope in this very short period of time that we had, I was able to tell you about nanotechnology, nanotexturing. It is in humans today. It is significantly helping the quality of life, I think, of those humans, just simply so far not having any infections in these clinical models. You know, if you've ever known someone who's gone through an infected implant, or you yourself have gone through an infected implant, you can know how detrimental it is. So being able to do this based on nanotexturing alone is significant progress, we believe. But I also hope I provided you the future of nanomedicine, looking at 4D printing, looking at some of these breathalyzer kits and other technologies like digital health, where I hope we're really taking lessons from COVID and getting beyond traditional old-fashioned healthcare, which clearly has not served us well, at least could be serving us better over the past couple of years. So acknowledgements for funding, certainly the startup companies that have really helped commercialize these technologies, and my lab, my students through the years who have developed the fundamental information that we are now taking to commercialize. And I thank you very much for your attention and listening to me talk about these things today. Thank you.